My name is Evelyn Parker, 67 years old, widow of a man who spent his life building things with his hands, and a son who prefers to sell them with his mouth. I was sitting at my breakfast table when the envelope came. Thick, ivory paper, embossed with the gold seal of Parker and Rowe Real Estate Group, my late husband's company, now run by my son, Daniel. I thought it was another quarterly report or holiday card from one of his investors. Instead, it was an invitation. You are cordially invited to the Parker Estate Auction, hosted at the Grandview Country Club, Saturday 4 p.m. Below that, in smaller type, a special showcase of the Parker family's private collection, rare antiques, heirlooms, and property assets. My hands trembled. The photo printed beneath the text showed my husband's favorite landscape painting, the one that had hung above our fireplace for 40 years. Next to it, my wedding china. I called Daniel. He answered on speaker, his voice sharp with impatience. "Mom, I was going to tell you, it's business, nothing personal." "You're selling our home's contents? Your father's things?" "Correction," he said. "The estate's things. It's not your personal property anymore, Mom. We're liquidating dormant assets to strengthen the trust." "Daniel," I whispered, "you can't sell memories." He laughed, not cruelly but worse, carelessly. "Please don't make this emotional. Investors will be there. Let's not embarrass ourselves, all right?" Embarrass ourselves, as if I were the fragile one, as if grief were a flaw. That night, I walked through the empty rooms of our old ranch house. The air still smelled faintly of cedar polish and tobacco, the ghost of my husband's favorite chair watching me from the corner. On his desk, the leather briefcase he used every day still sat locked. He'd carried that thing everywhere, but I'd never dared to open it. Until that night, the key still hung from the inside of his old jacket pocket, and when I turned it, I heard the soft click of something that had been waiting years to be found. The briefcase opened with a sigh, like the room itself had been holding its breath. Inside were neat stacks of manila folders, a few old bank receipts, and one worn notebook with my husband's handwriting across the cover for Evelyn, if ever they forget who built this. I sat down slowly, running my fingers over the indentations of his pen. Every letter was deliberate, written by a man who measured life in blueprints and deadlines. The last page caught my eye, a faded carbon copy of a joint ownership deed for our ranch property. My name, his, and a clause I'd never seen before, highlighted in yellow. "In the event of my death, all holdings under the Parker estate shall remain in survivorship to my spouse, Evelyn M. Parker, until such time as she relinquishes ownership voluntarily." I froze. That clause alone meant everything Daniel was planning to auction. Every antique, every acre of land, was still legally mine. The next morning I drove to his office downtown, a glass and steel building that looked like it hated the idea of fingerprints. His receptionist smiled the brittle smile of someone paid to deflect mothers. "Do you have an appointment, Mrs. Parker?" "No," I said, "but my husband did, 40 years ago." Daniel appeared a few minutes later, tie loosened, phone in hand. "Mom, you can't just show up here. You're selling the ranch, the antiques, everything your father left us." He sighed, the kind of sigh that tells you you've already lost. "It's not like that. You're comfortable, Mom. You've got your pension, the condo. Let me handle the big numbers." "You mean the $2 million you'll make from my husband's name?" He looked up sharply. "Where did you hear that?" "I read the auction listing," I said, "and I found the deed." His face drained of color. "That document is outdated. It doesn't apply after the trust restructuring." "Then you won't mind if I bring it to the attorney," I said, standing. His jaw tightened. "Mom, don't turn this into a circus. You'll embarrass yourself." I leaned forward just slightly. "No, Daniel, you already did that for me." When I got home, there was an envelope taped to my door, a cease and desist letter signed by my own son. The letter was printed on Parker and Rowe letterhead. Crisp, expensive paper that smelled faintly of cologne and arrogance. "Cease and desist from interfering with the liquidation of assets under Parker Family Holdings, Inc. Your claim of survivorship is null under the revised trust, Section 8B. At the bottom, my son's signature slashed through the page like a weapon. I read it 3 times, each line cutting deeper than the last. It wasn't the legal jargon that hurt. It was the tone, Cold, corporate, and calculated. I called him. He didn't answer, so I called his wife. Ashley picked up on the second ring, her voice sweet and metallic. "Oh, Evelyn, I was going to call you. I hope you got Daniel's letter. It's just a formality, nothing personal." "Nothing personal?" I asked quietly. "You're selling my husband's home." "Well, technically it's the estate's property now, and, well, there were concerns you might cause a scene at the auction. Daniel just wants everything to look professional." "Professional?" I repeated. "You mean profitable?" There was a pause. Then that same soft, sugar-coated dagger. "You know, sometimes nostalgia makes us clingy. It's better to let go gracefully." I hung up before the word gracefully could finish cutting. That afternoon, I drove to the ranch, or what was left of it. The gates were wide open, trucks coming and going, strangers carrying boxes from the house like it was a warehouse. My wedding portrait leaned against a crate labeled Lot 42, Vintage Oil Paintings. One of the movers nodded politely. "Ma'am, we were told to clear everything out for Saturday's viewing." "Told by who?" He hesitated. "Mr. Parker, the younger one." I stepped inside. The air smelled like dust and rain-soaked wood, my home stripped of its heartbeat. I found Daniel in the dining room talking to a man in a navy suit. "Mom," he said sharply, "you shouldn't be here. I built this home with your father. Every nail, every beam, and now you'll ruin the sale if you keep showing up like this," he snapped. "You don't understand the scale. There are investors, media, contracts. I understand betrayal," I said. "That's what scales fastest." His investor turned toward me, startled. "Mrs. Parker," he said slowly, "you might want to know. Your name is still listed as co-owner on several of these deeds." Daniel's face went white. The investor's words landed like thunder. "Your name is still on the co-ownership line, Mrs. Parker. I noticed it when reviewing the title transfers." Daniel's face drained of confidence, then hardened. "It's a clerical error," he said quickly. "My mother's portion was transferred after the trust update." But the man wasn't convinced. "I double-checked, Daniel. The record still shows joint survivorship. Without her signature, none of this can legally sell." For a second, I almost pitied him, watching him stumble over his own arrogance. Almost. "Why didn't you tell me this?" I asked. "Because," he snapped, "you never understand the business side. This isn't some family dinner table anymore. This is millions in property value, brand reputation, and your father's name," I cut in, "which you've turned into a discount label." He slammed his fist on the table. "Stop acting like you built this empire. You cooked the meals. You signed checks. That's it." The words hit harder than I expected, the way only your own child can wound you, right in the place you used to feel proud. "Everything you touch," I whispered, "you make smaller." The investor cleared his throat. "If that deed stands, Mrs. Parker's authorization is required for the sale. I'll have to pause my bid until that's resolved." Daniel's smile returned, brittle but controlled. "Leave it to me, Mr. Torres. I'll have the paperwork straightened out by tomorrow." When the man left, Daniel turned on me. "You just cost me $250,000 investor." "No, Daniel," I said evenly. "You cost yourself when you lied." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You're not as clever as you think. I'll make sure the paperwork disappears. Permanently." Then he did something I'll never forget. He walked to the fireplace, grabbed the old family photo of us three, me, him, and his father, and set it face down on the mantel. "Stop living in the past," he said coldly. "I'm the one carrying the Parker name now." That night, I got a call from Mr. Lyle, our retired accountant. His voice shook. "Evelyn, you might want to come by tomorrow. I found something in your husband's old tax binder, and it changes everything." I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw strangers carrying my life out in boxes. The dining room where I'd hosted Thanksgivings was now stripped bare. The chandelier Daniel once begged me not to sell when times were hard was listed online for bidding, starting at $18,000. When I arrived at Mr. Lyle's the next morning, he already had the binder open on his desk, the same gray leather folder my husband used to keep locked in his office. "Evelyn," he said softly, "I went through Walter's old estate records last night. You were right not to sign anything after he passed." He turned a page toward me. A crisp IRS form sat clipped to a letter from the county treasurer's office, dated 8 years ago. Estate taxes for Parker Holdings paid in full. Permanent exemption recorded under survivorship clause. Any attempt to liquidate without spouse consent shall constitute breach of fiduciary duty. My throat went dry. You mean Daniel's entire justification, the debt, the taxes? Fabricated, Mr. Lyle said grimly. He told the board there were outstanding estate liabilities. That's how he convinced them to back the sale. The room swayed for a second. I gripped the edge of his desk. So he lied to the investors too? He nodded. And if this goes through, you'll lose everything. Not just the house, but your legal standing as co-owner. Once the sale clears, the money disappears into shell accounts. I sank into the chair. My sons turned my husband's legacy into a smokescreen. Mr. Lyle slid a flash drive across the desk. This has digital copies of every document you'll need. But Evelyn, you have to be smart. He's powerful in this town. If you go in guns blazing, he'll bury you in lawyers before you can speak. I don't want a war, I whispered. I just want my husband's truth back. When I got home, the ranch felt colder than ever. Half the furniture gone, paintings stripped from walls, even my wedding dress packed into some anonymous lot. I sat on the bare living room floor and listened to the echo of the wind through empty hallways. It was the sound of everything I'd built being erased, one sale at a time. The phone rang. It was the auction manager. "Mrs. Parker," he said awkwardly, "your son requested we remove your name from tomorrow's program. He said you'd prefer not to attend." I sat in that hollow house for hours, staring at the silent phone after the auction manager hung up. My name, erased from the program, erased from the legacy I helped build. The humiliation settled in my chest like cold stone. On the mantel, where our family photo had stood for decades, there was now just a faint rectangle of dust. I touched it, and something in me, quiet for too long, cracked. I remembered the first time Walter handed me a business folder back in 1982, when we were building our first small property. He'd smiled and said, "If anything ever happens to me, promise you'll watch the numbers, not the noise." And I had, for 40 years. Maybe it was time to stop being polite about it. I drove back to Mr. Lyle's office before sunset, the flash drive in my coat pocket like a pulse. He looked up when I came in. "I was hoping you'd call," he said. "You've made up your mind?" "Yes," I said quietly. "I'm done watching him sell ghosts." He smiled faintly. "Then you'll need witnesses. The auction's public, right?" "Saturday, Grandview Country Club, reporters, investors, bidders." "Good," he said, sliding a folder toward me. "Then that's your stage. If you're going to bring this truth to light, make it count." We spent 2 hours planning, going through every document, every signature, every clause. When I left, the air outside felt sharp and clear. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't trembling. I was calculating. That night, I called my granddaughter, Mia, Daniel's daughter from his first marriage. She was studying journalism in Boston, and she was the only person in our family who hadn't turned into a stranger. "Mia," I said, "how do you feel about filming a live auction this weekend?" There was a pause, then a spark of curiosity. "Grandma, are you finally doing something reckless?" I smiled. "No, sweetheart, I'm finally doing something right." I opened Walter's old ledger one last time before bed. Beneath the deed, I found a folded page I hadn't seen before, a note in his handwriting. "If you ever need proof of what's yours, look inside the Bible I kept in my desk." The next morning, I pulled down Walter's Bible from the top shelf of his study. The one Daniel used to joke was just for show. The leather cracked slightly as I opened it. Inside the front cover was a small flat envelope sealed with his initials. I peeled it open with shaking fingers. Inside was a letter of amendment, handwritten, notarized, and dated just 3 weeks before he died. This document reaffirms the survivorship clause in full effect. Any alteration or attempt to transfer assets without Evelyn Parker's consent shall be considered fraudulent and void. Below that was Walter's signature. Perfect, steady, alive on the page. I felt my knees weaken. My husband, meticulous to the end, had left the proof I needed in the one place our son would never look, between scripture and silence. That morning I called Mr. Lyle again. "I found it," I said, "his handwritten amendment." There was a long pause on the other end. "Then that's the final nail," he said. "You're not just defending yourself, Evelyn, you're restoring the law." We met at the county clerk's office within the hour. The clerk scanned the document, cross-referenced the original filing, and nodded. "It's legitimate," she said quietly, "and binding." By afternoon, Mr. Lyle had drawn up two things: a temporary injunction to halt the sale, a public statement affirming my ownership under state probate law. "Wait until the right moment," he said. "Don't announce this in private. Do it when the cameras are rolling." I smiled faintly. "At the auction." "Exactly. Let him humiliate himself." That evening, I went home and dusted off Walter's old brooch, a silver crest he wore whenever he had to face a board meeting. I pinned it to my lapel. Mia called from Boston. "Grandma, I'm flying in Friday night. I'll record everything. Just tell me where to stand." "Somewhere visible," I said. "I want this story told right." Before bed, I printed copies of the letter, the ledger, and the injunction. I slipped them into a neat black folder and set it on the counter beside my car keys. Tomorrow, the world would see who really owned the Parker name. Late that night, a text arrived from an unknown number. "Withdraw your claim or you'll regret exposing this." By Saturday morning, Grandview Country Club looked more like a movie set than an auction hall. Luxury cars lined the driveway, men in navy suits shook hands beside champagne flutes, and a red banner read, "The Parker Legacy Auction, a celebration of vision." I arrived quietly, dressed in black wool and pearls, carrying Walter's black folder under my arm. No one greeted me. The greeter at the entrance smiled awkwardly, as if unsure whether to turn me away or pretend not to notice me. Inside, the ballroom gleamed with glass displays, my husband's watch collection, our wedding china, the oil painting he'd bought me on our 20th anniversary. Each one had a price tag printed in bold. I found a seat in the back row. The crowd buzzed with laughter and murmured bids. At the front of the room, Daniel stood at the podium, radiating charisma and pride. "To the future of Parker and Rowe," he said into the microphone, "where legacy meets opportunity." Polite applause followed. I waited. The first hour passed in a blur of numbers. Lot 5 sold for $46,000. Oh, cheers and champagne clinks. When they reached Lot 27, Parker Ranch Deed, Parcel A, I stood up. Daniel hesitated mid-sentence, clearly startled to see me. "Mom, this isn't—" "I'll just observe," I said evenly, my voice carrying through the microphone he'd forgotten to switch off. A few heads turned. Reporters noticed. Cameras clicked. When the gavel hit the podium, the bidder, a man from Houston, stepped forward, ready to sign. That's when I walked down the aisle. "Excuse me," I said calmly. "Before you complete that transaction, you should know the seller doesn't own what he's selling." Laughter rippled through the room until I laid Walter's Bible and the notarized amendment on the table. "Under state law, Section 12 of the Survivorship Clause," I continued, "any transfer made without the spouse's written consent is invalid." The auctioneer froze mid-sentence. The reporter nearest me raised her phone to record. Daniel tried to laugh it off. "Mom, you're confused." I turned to the crowd. "No, I'm not confused. I'm the widow of the man who built this empire, and I have proof that the man selling it is a fraud." Gasps, flashbulbs, silence. The room erupted as the auctioneer's assistant ran forward, whispering urgently, "Sir, the county clerk just faxed an injunction. The sale's frozen." Daniel's hand tightened on the podium. "Who filed it?" I lifted the black folder and met his eyes. I did. For a full 3 seconds, the ballroom was utterly still, the kind of stillness that follows a gunshot, when everyone's deciding whether to run or pretend nothing happened. Then the whispers began. "Did she just say fraud?" "Who is that?" "That's his mother." Daniel's face blanched, then flushed red. "Mom, this is completely inappropriate." "Inappropriate?" I said, my voice steady but sharp. "Like forging your father's signature? Like using his name to fill your own pockets?" He lunged toward me, whispering harshly, "You don't know what you're talking about." But I did. I opened the folder and held up the letter of amendment. The Bible still open on the table beside me. Reporters pressed forward, phones recording. This is a notarized amendment written by my husband, Walter Parker, dated 3 weeks before he died. It reinstates full survivorship to his spouse, meaning me. Every sale you've made today is illegal. The crowd broke into murmurs. Cameras flashed. Daniel tried to snatch the paper, but the auctioneer blocked him. "Sir, I can't proceed until this is verified." "Verified?" I said. "Already done." I handed the copy of the county clerk's certification to the nearest journalist. "Filed yesterday, 3:42 p.m. You can call to confirm." At the back of the room, a tall man in a gray suit raised his hand. "Mr. Torres, the investor Daniel had boasted about earlier in the week?" "Mrs. Parker," he said. "Are you telling us these deeds were marketed under false ownership?" "I'm saying," I replied, "they were stolen before the gavel ever hit the table." Torres turned to Daniel, voice cold. "You told us probate was settled. You said the estate was yours to manage." Daniel's voice shook for the first time. "This is being taken out of context." "Then maybe context needs witnesses," came another voice. Everyone turned as Mr. Lyle stepped forward holding up his briefcase. "I handled Walter's taxes. I have records of every payment, every survivorship clause, every lie your son told to get this auction approved." A ripple of gasps followed. Daniel looked trapped, cornered by truth. "You can't do this here. This is a private event." "No," I said, facing him fully. "It's public, just like your humiliation of me was." Just then, a county officer entered the ballroom, papers in hand. He looked straight at Daniel. "Mr. Parker, the sheriff's office would like a word about your forged documents." The room turned electric. The county officer strode forward, badge glinting under the chandelier. "Daniel Parker?" My son stiffened. "There's no need for this spectacle," he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. But the officer was unmoved. "We received a complaint this morning from the county probate office regarding forged amendments and unauthorized property sales. I'm here to deliver a temporary cease order and to collect any materials related to those transactions." Reporters surged closer, their flashes strobing across Daniel's pale face. "You can't just barge into a private auction." He barked. "Actually," the officer said evenly, "we can. Fraud that involves estate property is a public offense." A low murmur swept the room. Investors began whispering to each other, stepping back like men realizing they'd boarded a sinking ship. I remained still, watching my son unravel. He turned toward me, his voice cracking. "You're doing this to me? Your own son?" "I didn't forge my father's name," I said softly. "You did." Behind me, Mia stepped forward, phone in hand, recording the entire scene. "The world deserves to know the truth, Uncle Daniel." Her voice cut through the chaos like a bell. Daniel froze, recognizing the phone's red recording light, and the 100 other phones now pointed at him. "Mom, please," he hissed. "Stop this before it gets worse." I took a slow breath. "You made it worse the day you tried to erase your father's legacy, and me with it." The officer opened his folder and handed a paper to the auctioneer. "All transactions are void pending investigation. The venue must shut down immediately." Daniel slammed his hand against the podium. "Do you have any idea how much money this costs me? How hard I worked to build this?" "Yes," I said, meeting his eyes. "I built it with your father first." Gasps rippled again. Then, from the back, Mr. Torres spoke, voice cold, calculated. "If even one document you gave us is fake, you'll face not only charges but civil suits from every investor here." The color drained from Daniel's face. He opened his mouth, then closed it, trembling. As the officer escorted him from the podium, Daniel turned over his shoulder and spat the words that froze me in place. "You think you've won, Mother? Check your bank account tomorrow. You'll regret this." That night, the house was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. I sat in Walter's old armchair, watching the glow of my laptop screen. Daniel's words echoed in my head, "Check your bank account tomorrow." So I did. At 12:07 a.m., the transaction history updated. Inulgate. 3 withdrawals, same pattern, $15,000, $32,000, $41,000, all wired to an offshore account I didn't recognize. He was trying to drain me, the last retaliation of a cornered man. I opened Walter's ledger, running my fingers over the columns. Then I noticed something odd. A separate set of entries marked with Daniel's initials, DP, small and deliberate, recording transfers from a joint business account into a personal line under consulting fees. Over $300,000 in fees, all approved after Walter's stroke. I felt the cold clarity of betrayal settle in my chest. "Mia," I called softly. She appeared from the guest room, already dressed, eyes alert. "He's stealing again," I said, and this time he left the trail himself. She took one look at the screen and nodded. "Screenshot everything, timestamp it." We spent the next 2 hours printing proof, bank statements, signatures, and copies from Walter's ledger. By dawn, the counter was covered in neat stacks of evidence. At 8 a.m., Mr. Lyle arrived, his tie slightly crooked. "He moved money overnight, didn't he?" I handed him the folder. "He's gotten predictable." He studied the documents, whistled low. "This, Evelyn, is what seals it. Fraud, embezzlement, and misrepresentation of estate assets? He can't buy his way out of this anymore." "And we can prove every penny," I said. He smiled grimly. "Better, we'll let him prove it himself." Later that morning, we walked into the county courthouse with all our evidence in hand. Reporters were already waiting outside, tipped off by Mia's video from the auction. As the doors opened, I saw Daniel across the lobby, flanked by his lawyer, pale and trembling. He spotted me, and for the first time in his life, he didn't look angry. He looked scared. Just as the bailiff called the case number, Mia's phone buzzed. She showed me the screen, a short clip, Daniel, days earlier, on voicemail saying, "I'll transfer the money before she finds out. She won't live long enough to stop me." The courtroom was cold and echoing, sunlight cutting through the tall windows like sharp blades. Daniel sat across from me at the defendant's table, flanked by his attorney, the same man who'd once handled our family's corporate contracts. His expensive suit couldn't hide the sweat darkening his collar. Judge Whitman adjusted her glasses. "Mrs. Parker, please present your evidence." I stood, hands steady despite the tremor inside me, and handed the clerk the thick black folder. "Exhibits A through G, Your Honor. Financial records, notarized amendments, transaction screenshots, and a recorded voicemail." The clerk pressed play. Daniel's voice filled the courtroom, loud, clear, arrogant. "I'll transfer the money before she finds out. She won't live long enough to stop me." The words landed like gunfire. Gasps echoed through the gallery. Even his lawyer slumped slightly. Judge Whitman looked directly at Daniel. "Is that your voice?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, but what?" she cut in. "You manipulated your father's estate, forged signatures, withdrew unauthorized funds, and tried to sell assets you didn't own. Do you deny any of that?" Daniel's jaw clenched. "I was trying to protect the company. By destroying your family?" I said quietly. He turned toward me, eyes wet. "You always wanted control. You couldn't stand that I finally had the power." "No," I said. "I couldn't stand watching my husband's life work turned into a scam." The judge banged the gavel once. "Enough. The court recognizes the legitimacy of Mrs. Parker's documentation. All transactions under Mr. Daniel Parker's name are hereby frozen. Ownership of Parker and Rowe Holdings reverts to the surviving spouse, Mrs. Evelyn Parker. Charges for fraud and forgery will proceed." Daniel's face went blank. The bailiff stepped forward. "Please, Mom," he whispered as they cuffed him. "Don't let them take me away." I swallowed hard. "I didn't take anything from you, Daniel. You did this yourself." They led him out past the reporters. Cameras flashed like lightning as he disappeared behind the wooden doors. Mr. Lyle turned to me. "It's done." I exhaled for the first time in weeks, my body trembling with exhaustion and something deeper. Release. When we stepped outside, the morning air smelled like rain and freedom. Mia hugged me so tightly I nearly lost my balance. "You did it, Grandma. You saved the name." "No," I said softly. "I restored the truth. The name will have to save itself now." That evening, I returned to the ranch, the house quiet but alive again. I opened Walter's ledger, placed the court seal beside his last entry, and whispered, "It's finished." Epilogue: Dignity and CTA. Months later, the Parker Ranch is mine again. Legally, publicly, proudly. The business continues under my oversight, with Mia as chief accountant. She's learning the same lesson her grandfather taught me. Numbers don't lie, people do. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. It writes, files, and stamps quietly until the truth can't be denied. If you've listened this far, thank you. Tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my place? And don't forget to subscribe to Revenge Stories U60 USA, because stories like mine deserve to be heard.